Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Ian.
And so am I. And much like Aquaman, we are men born into two worlds, one of comics and print and the other of film and television. Only through casual discussion of these two mediums can we hope to come to terms with the battle that rages within ourselves and truly become the teapot. This week we'll be diving into the trench as we cover the first 6 issues of Aquaman Volume 7 by Geoff Johns and Reis. That's because this episode is all about the 2018 film Aquaman, and unlike Amber Heard, we kept our British accents for this one. Ready, Ian?
Ready.
Then let's get wet. So, Aquaman, what do you think of the film?
I had a good time with it. I enjoyed Aquaman.
Aqua.
No, we call it Aquaman because we're British.
We do.
And not American.
Aqua.
Like I said, I had a good time with it.
Yeah.
Maybe not my favourite, but a good watch.
Right.
I mean, it's got its ups and downs.
Yes, definitely.
Your sort of first thoughts?
I admire the balls to the wall lunacy of it all. There's quite a tendency with comic book movies, especially DCYou ones, to attempt to subdue the more fantastical elements of their superheroes. And I like that they didn't try to do that here, because it really wouldn't work for Aquaman to be grounded in any way, shape or form.
I think the costumes especially, they are pretty much page-to-screen adaptations of the comics.
Yeah.
They're so bright and so vibrant that you kind of go, yeah, if they had tried to ground this and make it real, it would not have worked.
No, exactly. I mean, I think there was an attempt to do so with Batman v Superman and then into Justice League. But yeah, this film just went all out, right, well, no, we're not going to do that. This isn't Shakespeare. This isn't a Oscar-winning contender. We might as well show these weird undersea battle arenas with massive screens that have the pros and cons of each of the fighters on them in a comedy fashion. We might as well cast Gimli to lead the crab people and Mary Poppins as a giant kraken. it just went absolutely insane, you know. And I do admire that. I don't think it's a particularly good film, but I do like that they've done something a bit different with it to the rest of the DCEU so far.
Yeah. This is actually my second time of watching the film. I didn't see it in the theatre or the cinema. I think I watched it at home on my iPad ages ago.
Optimum viewing experience then.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things of going, well, I've seen all the other films thus far in the DCEU.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go pay to watch it at the cinema. I may as well download it at home and watch it on my iPad.
Yeah. I'll let you into a secret there. The last DCEU film I watched in the cinema, actually, no, I was going to say the last one was Man of Steel, but actually I watched Shazam in the cinema. So those are the only two. I didn't see anything else.
Okay. Yeah, I think I definitely saw Shazam because I thought that was a really good film. And I took Kate to go see Batman v Superman, and she got so bored with it. Especially that last fight scene where they're just punching each other. And she's like, oh, there's a sink. Oh, there's a second sink. Oh, there's a third sink. Just kept throwing sinks.
It was, I don't know what happened with that film. We've got an episode lined up on that, though. But it is probably the film we have alluded to most during this whole podcast since we've been doing it. Every time we want to come up with an example of a bad superhero film, we come up with Batman v Superman.
Talking about the fight scenes then, I mean, this film, I thought the fight scenes were actually really good, and Kate did watch it with me this week. First time that she'd seen it, and she often gets bored with fight scenes just punching and throwing and all sorts. But she was like, yeah, actually, I didn't get bored, which is a good sign to show that she enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I do like that there are several one-shot action scenes. Even though it is like CGI, the camera follows the person around rather than like it cuts 20 times, which I really like that.
Yeah.
There's one at the start in the lighthouse. It's also when Orm fights Arthur.
Those long tracking shots you get, and the one through through Italy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really fun set pieces. You know, the underwater scenes, which I said before, very pretty. The part in Italy was fun. And I genuinely think the best part of the film, fortunately, because it's what we're covering today, is the trench attack on the boat, which I think reminds me of Thor Ragnarok in the way that it's got these sort of series of shots, which could all be metal album covers.
Yeah.
You know, these really sort of operatic in scope shots. And it's no surprise, I think, when you consider the director, James Wan, has a history of doing horror films.
Yeah.
He's done Furious 7, Fast and Furious 7, but also he's done mostly horror films apart from that. And so I think the scene on the boat works really well. I think that's where he shines.
Yeah. I reckon if you just showed that scene to someone, and you didn't say it was from a comic book film or whatever, I reckon that they would probably say that that was from a horror film.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, they are dressed in green and orange spandex, but oh no, he's not in orange at that point, is he? But she's got back into her green spandex, which I was a bit confused about, because was she wearing that under her clothes in Italy, or
maybe had a little satchel? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah, I think parts like that are really good, but I do think the film is too long.
Yeah, clock's in around 2 hours 20, I think.
Yeah, and I think that could have easily been streamlined. So much happens in this film that didn't further the main plot line, and just removing things like Black Manta subplot would have trimmed it down a bit. You know, and I say that as a fan of Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. The only reason that whole subplot is in there, it feels like to me, is to set up for an inevitable sequel.
Oh yeah, of course.
And that's generally been a problem with the DCEU for me in general, is this desperation to set up sequels and spin-offs rather than focusing on the solo stories.
Yeah, I mean, I do get what you mean, but it's trying to obviously do a sequel to itself. It's not trying to set up Justice League 2, for example.
That would be fine if it didn't then spend 20 minutes trying to do that. If it was just a throwaway, an after-credit sequence or whatever it was, or if it was worked in organically, I feel that Black Manta subplot adds about 20 minutes to the film, and I feel it would be a tighter, a more coherent film without it. In fact, I had a lot more understanding of what Black Manta's motives were than I did Ocean Master's.
Yeah.
And he wasn't the main antagonist, so they could have taken that 20 minutes and given it to Ocean Master and given him a bit more fleshing out, a bit more reason for doing what he's doing. I agree with you, it's definitely not as prevalent in Aquaman. I don't think it's as bad as it is some of the other films, but it just messes with the pacing of the film. It reminds me of Avengers Age of Ultron, when Thor goes off to have a bath. That's yeah, that whole thing just takes the whole film to a grinding halt, adds 10 minutes in for no apparent reason. That sort of thing. It ruins the pacing of the film a little bit.
Yeah, they could have used just someone else, just a random person. Doesn't have to be a comic person.
They had other soldiers there who seemed to be giving them a bit of trouble, so just have the soldiers turn up.
Yeah, the main story of Orm and Arthur overshadows the use of Black Manta.
Yeah, so Black Manta is not going to be your primary antagonist in this film. Don't spend 20 minutes setting him up if it's for a later film. You know, spend 20 minutes in the next film setting him up to use him as the main bad guy in that one.
Yeah.
And spend that extra 20 minutes on Orm in this one.
Well, talking of Orm then, not sure if you picked up on this, but the look of Orm in the film is the classic look of Arthur in the comics.
Yeah.
So it's the blonde hair, the blue eyes, and I'm pretty sure that Orm is dark-haired.
I think so, yeah.
They've used the classic appearance of Arthur for Orm, which I quite like that change. Doesn't really add much or take away much from the film.
No, I mean, it doesn't. I suppose on that note, what do you make of the cast, you know, in terms of the main characters, but also the supporting?
When I first heard about Jason being Aquaman, I was a bit like, it's not the Aquaman that we kind of know from, you know, the comics and some of the shows, but he pulls it off really well. He can be a little bit over the top and a little bit like, yeah, dude, let's get a drink and party on, Garth. But yeah, I think it works for this film. Other characters that I liked was Randall Park. Very, very quick.
Yeah, he's barely in it, is he?
Chucked in. But I believe that actor as the character, it works with the little screen time that he's got. I'm a fan of him from Ant-Man and WandaVision.
I prefer him as Jimmy Woo, I'll be honest, but then he's only got a couple of minutes in this, so...
Mira... I mean, let's not go into that actress too much. It works, again, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, you give that role to someone else, it would probably still work.
Yeah, this is it. I'm not convinced that either Jason Momoa or Amber Heard are actually very good actors at all, but they both play their part, they look good doing it, and it's not exactly Shakespeare, is it? You know, it's fine. They're okay.
Yeah.
They fill their roles and they do a good enough job and then they do the classic thing of putting lesser knowns in the main roles and then packing out the rest of the cast with these capital A actors.
Yeah. William Dafoe as Volko, is it?
Yes, yeah.
Volko, yeah. That works. I mean, he's always been a really good supporting actor, I thought. Really good in the Spider-Man films, going back to the old Sam Raimi trilogy. I enjoy seeing him. Again, it works. Yeah, I mean, now we're talking about the characters. It's kind of like, well, any actor could play these. There's no standout person that you go, oh, that role is this person. Like, when we talked about Iron Man 3,
Yeah.
I now see Robert Downey as Iron Man.
Yeah.
Whereas if they recast Arthur, I kind of go, okay.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It would be a bit of a jarring thing, but it wouldn't be... I don't think anyone would be up in arms about it, would they? No, I know what you mean. A lot of the cast... There's a lot of big names in this. As I said before, they had Gimli playing the crab people. They had Nicole Kidman playing Arthur's mum, Atlanta.
Yeah.
Actually, that looked a bit weird. Tamara Morrison and Nicole Kidman with the smooth-skinned face at the beginning. That was really odd when they were de-aged.
Yeah.
It just looks so smooth and shiny. I don't know. But you're right. I think a lot of the actors in this could have easily been switched out with other actors and you wouldn't really miss them. But you do have, like you say, actors like Willem Dafoe who are just lending the scenes they're in a bit more gravitas.
Yeah.
And then you have absolutely crazy scenes like Julie Andrews playing the Kraken. What casting decision was... I mean, don't get me wrong, I liked it, but it was just... I'd want to know what was going on in that meeting that day.
And how much she got paid for it as well.
Yeah, there is that. There's a little bit too much posing going on for my liking with these actors, especially Jason and Amber. So many times where they just sort of emerge in slow motion from the water or flick their hair back in slow motion.
Yeah, kind of like a weird scene from Bond.
Yeah, or like it just reminds me of an extended perfume commercial. It's just...
Well, he does stink, so he does need perfume.
I didn't understand that. Why did he stink? He was swam in the sea the whole time.
I mean, if you can smell yourself underwater, you really smell. You should go to the doctor.
Maybe he's got shark-like smelling. It's a power we don't know much of.
I mean, we've said all these little tidbits about the film. Do you think it's trying to be too funny?
I think it is trying to differentiate itself from the films that had come before. It was trying to get more into that Marvel gear of things as opposed to the Batman v Superman one. I don't necessarily think it succeeds in being that funny a lot of the time.
No.
But I think it's trying to be. But there's a bit of tonal whiplash at times. Scenes where people are getting absolutely mauled by sharks and there's big battles and then these stupid jokes thrown in. And yes, you do get that from time to time in the MCU as well. But yeah, I noticed it a bit more here, perhaps just by contrast to the other DC films that we've got so far.
Yeah. I mean, there are bits as well, I know this isn't an Iron Man thing. He doesn't own this, but there's the use of nicknames or pop culture or things. Arthur says to Volko, "You trained me, Cobra Kai." And he also says to Tamira, "All right, Fight Club." So there's these sort of pop culture throw-in lines that, like I said, it's not owned by Iron Man, but it's a very much Iron Man thing to do.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Perhaps they're trying to make him more like Iron Man. I mean, a cross between Iron Man and Thor, perhaps, because there was very much a Thor storyline going on with the plot of this film, is brother versus brother, kingdom. And even those scenes where they went back to Atlantis for the first time and they went in through the not Rainbow Bridge, whatever that was called, that gate.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that in the comic? I know it's not in this comic that we read, but is it in any comic on Aquaman?
I believe so, but I can't remember.
Okay.
It's been a while. And this is the most Aquaman I've read is the run that we're going to be talking about later today.
Okay.
Which, as you can see from the comics later today, is not particularly focused on Atlantis and that side of things. It's more focused on the land-based stuff. But
talking about the film as a whole then, I mean, you've literally taken what I've put down here. It is a blend of Thor, Iron Man, also chucked in Lion King as well. That whole thing about the returning true king.
Yeah, which is basically Hamlet.
Yeah, Hamlet.
Yeah.
Black Panther.
So actually, I think I've said twice already that it's not Shakespeare, which that is literally Shakespeare now. So maybe I'm getting it wrong. But yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't think it's a particularly great film. If we weren't doing it for this episode, I probably wouldn't have gone back and rewatched it. But I don't think it's completely without merit. I do think there is some stuff going on in it that is good.
Yeah. Something that I picked up on when I went back to rewatch it.
Yeah.
Do you remember that poster or ad campaign, whatever it was, when Justice League was being announced and there was an Aquaman thing holding the trident and it said, "Unite the Seven"?
Yeah, yeah.
And then that didn't come up in the original film.
Yeah,
nor did it come up in the new one, which I'm surprised it didn't because it was 4 hours long.
And there weren't even 7 of them, there were 6 in the end.
Do you think that was maybe a nod to the 7 kingdoms rather than Justice League thing?
No, I don't think so. I think it was probably meant to be 7 people. I mean, it was almost certainly going to be Green Lantern, I would have said, as the 7th member, just because that was when they did the revamp around this time in the comic books. Those were the 7 core members. That was when Cyborg was added and became a mainstream Justice League member. So I think that was what they were basing it on, but Green Lantern didn't make the cut for whatever reason. And like you say, even in the 4-hour cut, he didn't quite make it.
Yeah. I mean, something else that I thought of when it said about the 7, and one of the earlier scenes when Orm goes to the other king of the Zembel or something, I can't remember their name. There's the statues all around and they're all holding their tridents and swords, and, you know, it's a big thing. I thought about the 7 gods of Shazam.
Oh, right, yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know where the whole thing about the 7 has come into it, because it seems to be a lot of DC stuff just like the word 7.
Yeah, it's a magic number, isn't it? It's just pick a number. Yeah, it's a lot of things. Actually, 7 repeats a lot. Maybe it's just a nice number. But no, yeah, I seem to remember the posters, all of the character posters had the Unite the 7 written on them, didn't they? So there was, you know, one for Wonder Woman and Superman and all that. Maybe not Superman. He was dead at the time. I can't remember. I haven't thought about it in a long, long time, I'll be honest. But yeah,
I mean, this film overall for me, as I said, fun time, but it's got some weird scenes in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but the bit where Aquaman picks up the true trident, suddenly it becomes the start of an X-Men film.
Oh, you're going to send me something here, are you?
Yeah, don't watch all of it. Go to 3 minutes 30.
But he's linking up with all the fish and crabs and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I think someone must have just watched an X-Men film and gone, wow, that's quite cool. Let's do that when he picks up the trident and zooms into his eye, and just, I don't understand it really.
Well, those X-Men intros also always reminded me of the Spider-Man intros, so I think it just feels quite early 2000s, that whole little sequence.
And considering this film came out in 2018, I mean, they've always been a bit behind the MCU, but this was going before the MCU. Yeah, I mean, other things that I don't really get is that Aquaman speaks to fish in this, but also he speaks Russian and Italian.
Yeah, maybe he just learnt them. I don't know. Maybe it's just to show that he was worldly.
Yeah, they've just chucked so much things in this film that I just don't understand.
Yeah, well, that's it, exactly. It does really hurt the pacing with how much stuff is going on. There's one too many of those little set pieces where they go to different countries, one after another, and the amount of times that the on-screen caption said somewhere in the Indian Ocean or somewhere here, somewhere in the Sahara Desert. It's like, well, be specific, all right? Either put it up and be specific, or don't put it up at all. And it was just, I think, about half an hour in the second act. It's just one place after another, after another, after another.
It's like a weird, like, PS4 game.
Yeah, it really did feel...
You've got to go on an adventure.
Yeah, I think that's what they were going for. They were going for romping adventure around the world, Indiana Jones type thing. Unfortunately, it felt more like National Treasure.
I thought you were going to say it felt more like Indiana Jones 4.
Well, that as well, yeah.
So you mentioned there about the Sahara. The music in this becomes daft. Right. There's a bit, like you just said there, in the Sahara scene, they've got a weird remix of Toto's Africa.
Awful.
Which I want to say is by Pitbull.
It was by Pitbull, yeah, and it was terrible.
Yeah, I don't get that, and I learned this morning that it's something that James Wan put in there himself as a tribute to Fast and the Furious 7, or his background in that franchise.
Wow.
I mean, I don't get that at all.
Well, if there's one franchise that deserves a tribute, it's Fast and Furious, clearly.
But yeah, James Wan was the director and I believe also co-writer of the film.
I think so, yeah.
And did you know that he had some help with the story from Geoff Johns?
I did see that in the credits at the end, which brings us on nicely to the comic book. So shall we move on to that now?
Yeah, let's dive into the pages of the trench. Ha ha ha. A reused joke.
You have reused the joke. We've done that one. All right. So before we get started on the comic book, question for you. Namor or Aquaman?
I know sod all about Namor, apart from his appearances in a couple of the cartoon TV shows. I remember a bit with him in the Fantastic Four. I don't know if that was in Spider-Man or something. I don't know. Or X-Men. I'm going to have to say Aquaman because I know more about him. You?
Oh, yeah, Namor all day long.
Namor, fair enough.
He's a more interesting character. He's just a bit of a dick version of Aquaman, which is...
which is saying something.
Yeah, which is always more interesting.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you a question then.
Okay.
We see in the film and at the start of the book as well, Aquaman appears to be bulletproof.
He does, yeah, for the most part.
Is that always the case, or is that a new 52 thing?
No, Aquaman is very strong. We saw him throwing a truck. He is bulletproof. He can swim very fast. He is very much more capable than people give him credit for. And I think that is what the intention of this series in particular was, to sort of rehabilitate the character. There was a perception of Aquaman that he was a bit of a joke character.
Yeah.
You know, this guy who can talk to fish, and that's it. And that's something that Johns has deliberately played into in this comic book.
Oh, yeah.
He has numerous characters making references and jokes about it, you know, making the same jokes that readers were making and idle fans were making as well about Aquaman for years. He has characters make to his face in the comic book and then basically shows Aquaman saving them all and being a badass with it.
Yeah. I mean, the police at the start say, the boys back in the station will never let us live this down.
Yeah.
It's like, well why?
Yeah, well, this is it. It's sort of a way of lampshading the jokes that existed before and addressing them. It is a little heavy-handed in sequences like that, because you got to think, in the comic books, you know, Aquaman had been about for years and he had saved the world multiple times. So it is a bit bullshit to think that anyone at that point had gone, hey, this Justice League member, one of the top heroes in the world, well, I can't believe we got saved by him.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I get what he was doing. You know, he Geoff Johns, just a bit of background information, obviously. This is a jumping on point, designed as a jumping on point for readers, the new Aquaman.
Like me.
Exactly, which is why I chose it for this episode. Geoff Johns, as we know from our Green Lantern episode, had already had a lot of success with Green Lantern at that point. He had turned that character into, well, not just one, but multiple best-selling comic books. And they wanted him to work that magic on Aquaman, to bring that over. I think he was also doing Justice League around this point as well. So they really wanted him to rehabilitate the character.
Yeah.
And that's what this run is designed for. So as someone who is unfamiliar to Aquaman in the comics, how do you think they handled the introduction of the character?
Oh, I think it was handled really well. I mean, I like Geoff Johns' style. Like you said, we read Green Lantern, which I enjoyed that. This is precisely what you've just said, a jumping on point for me and for people that don't know that much. Disregarding the ending, which is a cliffhanger, I think I will continue to read this. You know, it's one of the comics that we've read so far that I've actually gone, I could easily just continue this story.
Yeah.
If you'd said, we're going to read, you know, the first 2 issues, but I had a book of 6, I would have finished the book.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said read the first 2 issues because that would be a waste of both of our time.
You know what I mean.
So you said something similar actually about the Green Lantern episode, and I think this is what something we're discovering here is you quite like this modern cinematic style of storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, fewer text and dialogue boxes and more splash pages and action. Would you say that was fair?
Yeah, I mean, comparing it to other non-Geoff Johns work, like Sin City, for example.
Yeah.
That is very much like you just said, like sort of splash pages of fighting and action, but then it's also got pages that can just be a lot of text.
Yeah.
I think the way that Geoff Johns writes is that he works a good blend of them both. I've never been bored reading stuff from his work.
Yeah.
Where other works, I've been a little bit like, this guy's just going on and on, like I am now. But, you know, you've got a page of just text. You're like, well, okay, I get it. Why is there 2 paragraphs here and not just like a few lines?
Yeah, and a wider shot showing what was going on.
Yeah.
He seems to trust the artist a bit more to communicate the ideas and what he wants without having to have an internal monologue saying, and then I strike back with my arm and hit the guy in the face. They just show that in the panel.
Yeah, it's easier to follow, it's fun to read, and it treats the audience well. It just doesn't treat the audience as you're an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, it's not overly...
Which I am.
Well, yeah, fair enough. It's not overly complex stuff, is it? It's quite a straightforward storyline, all things considered. But I think it delivers that storyline. And this is what I've always liked about Geoff Johns' work, is his delivery of these things is... It's very to the point. It's very entertaining, as you say. You can read... Well, I read 6 of these comic books within the space of about an hour yesterday.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just romp through them and you want to read more afterwards. You want to see where this is going, which sometimes when you're reading longer comic books that take a lot longer or recap things regularly, it makes reading them back to back a chore. He doesn't do much of the recapping, I've noticed as well. The ethos that every comic is somebody's first is not really here. You know, if you picked up issue 3 of Aquaman, you wouldn't really know what had come before it.
That's something that obviously we picked up on going back to the early ages of with Marvel where you go into issue 4 from issue 3 and it'd be like, previously Wolverine has done this and Charles did this, and it's like, yeah, I get it, I've just read that.
Yeah, and more than that, characters would say, well, good job, I've got my adamantium claws and my healing factor, and it would happen every issue.
Yeah, I mean, like I asked you at the start of this, questions such as him being bulletproof. I was just curious. That's not something that I thought about all the way through, thinking, well, I have to find out why he's bulletproof, or, they have to explain it. He just is.
Yeah.
This is what's happened. That's it.
Exactly. As they say in the film, he's attuned to the depths of the ocean and therefore can handle vast amounts of pressure and things like that. So he is more resistant to damage, stronger, all of these things. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about the characterization of Arthur himself?
I mean, I don't have that much knowledge of the character, especially sort of comic book wise, but just going from the first couple of pages, he is this sort of guy that's been around for a while and he's been mocked a lot. So obviously it's kind of like a meta joke to the fans, the fact that you've got people in the book that are going, hey, it's Aquaman, I hear you talk to fish. Why are you eating fish and chips? And like he's there going, I just want lunch. I just want to eat some food. Like, just leave me alone.
He seems tired, doesn't he?
Yeah, and you feel that just reading the first 3-4 pages.
Yeah.
So straight away, he's a lot more humanized.
Yeah.
I guess is the term.
Definitely.
Than just being this Superman, like, I can fly, I can win all my fights.
Yeah, what we have here is definitely a much more grounded Aquaman. Literally, he's living in a lighthouse with Mera in a seaside town and interacting with the locals, as opposed to being the king of Atlantis in the sea.
Yeah.
So although there's still a serious threat, the stakes are relatively low. A few people die, a few more get captured. There's nothing world-ending going on.
Nope.
And we're completely removed from the whole King Arthur and the politics of Atlantis, which is something that the comics had covered several times up until that point.
Yeah.
And all of which makes him other. It makes him a bit alien to the real world. To the land world. And so I think that was a deliberate choice, is to literally ground him on the land and have him interact with those people to make him more relatable as a character.
Yeah, it does work really well. I think the fish out of water, excuse the pun, person in this is Mera.
Yeah.
She's the one who doesn't understand why people do things or why people say things, and she looks down on humans.
Yeah.
Where Arthur's more, maybe not accepting, but he puts up with it.
Yeah, well, he was born and raised on land, and so he's, he knows what humans are and what they're capable of.
Yeah.
The good and the bad of that. So he's a lot more accepting of that. Like you say, Mera, it's all more alien to her because she was raised under the water. I think the comic book does a better job of that than the film. I think the film, she comes there, she looks a bit confused at things, she eats a flower, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, we get clips of it in the film, but I like the way it's handled more in the comic than it is in the film.
It seems more like a conflict in the comics, whereas in the film it's very much played for laughs.
Yeah, there's the bit when she's absorbing the water from the guy's face and body. I mean, he's being an absolute arse, and I don't think that she was going to kill him. I think she was just trying to show how powerful she is, coming from her character to his, and also how the story has been created. It's Johns that has gone, right, she is quite powerful. Let's show it in a humanized way. And the way that it's done is really good, actually, because, she's absorbing the water from him and she's counting down the days, which I quite like. That much water is you not drinking water for a day, then it's 2 days and it's 3 days. And she's saying, right, you got headaches, you got cramps, you got blurred vision, which I really liked that.
Yeah.
I think it's not until the girl that she met in the shop comes to her at the end, and then she kind of goes, oh, not all humans are dicks.
Yeah, exactly. It does a lot more, because she doesn't feature that heavily in the first 5 issues. That 6th issue is really about her. But it still manages, I feel, to do a lot more characterization with her than the film allows in its quite lengthy runtime.
Yeah.
It sort of shows that conflict better. It shows her struggling with life on the land, which maybe we'll get more of in the sequel.
Well, yeah.
Because obviously in the film, she's not really gone to land yet. She's not really gone to ground. So yeah, interesting to see where they go with that.
Her past did confuse me a little bit. It's touched on, like, I think it's a page and that's about it. But it says, like, 4 years ago. and she's talking to her father, I think. She says something that her father sent her to kill Arthur.
Yeah. So this is part of the truncated plot lines of the comic books that we get around this time, is because the DC universe regularly reboots, everything that happened is regularly moved up to recent history as opposed to 60, 70, 80 years of history. So this 4 years is basically going back to her sort of origins, not quite exactly as it happened, but a revamped version of her history. And it's kind of what we see in the film as well, is she goes to find Arthur because, you know, she's sent there and told that he's a turncoat and a villain and is working against Atlantis.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, like I said earlier, if you disregard the sort of cliffhanger part of issue 6, it's things like that they've sort of sprinkled in that I've gone, oh, this is why I want to read more, because I'm assuming at some point they'll explain it or they'll do an issue on it or something. But yeah, it's a good run. As in, the first 6 issues is a good 6 issues to get into. If you don't know anything about Aquaman or this world, I would still say it's a good read to pick up. And they've even used quite a lot of aspects from it in the film.
Yeah. Well, that's partly because, as you said, Geoff Johns helped write the film. He did the story ideas of the film, and it came after this comic book. So,
I mean, we've not really talked about the trench aspect of the trench, which I believe we should do.
We probably should before we move on to your egg hunt. So, yeah, I mean, the trench, the villains of this piece, they make a brief appearance in the film, but what do you make of them?
Yeah, I think they're a lot more fleshed out in the comic. I mean, they are seen as a monster race. They come to kill or hunt. I think their backgrounds, I would say it's explained more in the comics than it is in the film.
Probably, yeah.
Even though they explain some about it in the film, but it's so quick that you go, oh, okay, fair enough. We've now gone on to this fight scene. Where in the book, it's a blend of fight scenes and their history.
A little bit,
yeah. And who
we
they
don't
are.
get the full picture. They make allusions to them being descended, as was explained in the film, from the ancient Atlanteans, but you don't get the full picture of that until later comics. So, yeah, obviously the Trench do come back in the future. They do become more of a villain, but they were a new villain for this era of Aquaman. They have a very straightforward motive, which helps, because you want to focus on Arthur for the first 6 issues. So basically their motive is they want food and they want to feed their queen, so they come to the land and they steal humans. So which means it's...
And dogs.
And dogs, yeah. Which means it's a very straightforward motive, but also a very deadly and a very serious one. You know, cannibal fishmen from the deep is a pretty dark idea, especially when you then show them trying to eat, as you say, dogs and children from a sleepy seaside town. So I liked that approach, as it's having quite a basic but threatening villain with a straightforward motive, and then sprinkling, like you say, those little bits of exposition, these ideas behind it, which they can then build on later. This idea of having all these different, you know, types of Atlantean, which is again something that came up in the film.
You said there the word exposition, which I think in films is overused so much.
Definitely.
Whereas in the books, I wouldn't necessarily use that word, even though it is exposition. I wouldn't use it because it works well in the story. It's not just a page or a character just telling you everything at once. Yeah. It's little bits here and there. So they sort of feed it to you very slowly rather than going, here's 10 years of history. Right, now cut away.
Absolutely, yeah. It slowly builds a new mythos as opposed to the films, which just sort of haphazardly throw a load of exposition at you, have one character do a voiceover. I mean, speaking of voiceovers, we didn't mention it during the film, but the beginning and end voiceovers, what was the point of those in the film? You know, Arthur, again, speaking of Iron Man, going, I am Aquaman at the end. It was like...
I am Aquaman.
Yeah, we know, mate. We just watched a film of it. Everyone was calling you Aquaman.
Yeah, that's what the film's called, mate. Yeah, I mean, well, talking about the film and the comic then, something that I did quite like, actually, about them both, really, is that the Atlanteans have to wear these sort of land suits, if you will, which I think they've literally pulled that straight out of the comic and put it in the film.
Yeah, and the sort of watery holograms as well were straight from the comics,
Yeah, like we said, I think that's because you've got someone like Geoff Johns who worked on the comic and the film. So there's a bunch of Easter eggs in this film.
Well, it should make your job this week extra easy then. So let's get on with it, shall we? Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you.
So, Iain, what have you got for us this week?
I mean, like I said, there's a whole range of eggs in this.
Are there free-range eggs?
Free-range, caged range.
I'm so sure about this now.
Hold on, no, let's not do that. Something that I didn't learn from the film, but I learned about the character, is that some of Aquaman's tattoos are actually real. Jason Momoa has like a patterned tattoo on his forearm, and it's something to do with like his family crest. So when Zack Snyder was making Justice League and potentially going back to Batman v Superman, he decided to incorporate that into the look of the character. So obviously he continued it up his arm and onto his shoulder and his chest, which then clearly James Wan had to continue into this film, which that's fair enough. I mean, you kind of have to carry on patterns and...
Well, not necessarily. If it's a British accent, you can drop it entirely.
But yeah, speaking of James Wan, he actually hid the creepy doll from The Conjuring at the bottom of the sea.
Oh, really?
Which is obviously a reference to his horror background, as you said.
Yeah.
It's the Annabelle doll.
Right. I've not actually seen any of them. I'm not a big horror aficionado. So.
I haven't seen that particular range of films, but I've saw one, can't remember what it's called, but it was about a creepy ventriloquist doll that I think a couple were getting married or engaged or whatever, and someone sent it to them as a present, and it's directed by James Wan, and it's bloody weird. But yeah, I think he's got a thing for horror films with creepy dolls in.
Maybe. They are creepy.
They really are.
Yeah.
Like the one from Goosebumps.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what's his name? Oh, well. I'm not going to sit and try and remember his name. I know you mean. There's a little... Yeah.
Yeah, and something that I did quite like, actually, because I used to watch it when I was a kid, was near the beginning of the film, in the lighthouse, the TV was playing Stingray.
Oh, right, yeah.
The old classic 60s puppet series.
Yeah.
Similar to Thunderbirds, which is about submarines and sea creatures.
Yeah. It's an underwater adventure. Yeah.
A nice little nod.
I noticed as well the fishbowl was sitting, and it panned very slowly over a copy of The Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft, which is the wrong book, because Dunwich was a landlocked farming village. I think they meant to put maybe Shadow over Innsmouth or Call of Cthulhu would have made more sense in there, because they were both sea-based towns and horrors, but I noticed there was a very slow pan over the Dunwich Horror for some reason.
Yeah, maybe it was a little nod to the author.
Well, yeah, maybe, but again, if you...
They ordered the wrong book on Amazon Prime.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm genuinely thinking they meant to put Shadow over Innsmouth on there, because that would be a lot more. There's fish people in that and all sorts, and it would really play into the whole trench aspect, but oh well.
I mean, well, talking about like sea creatures and what's not, in this film there was an octopus playing the drums.
Yeah.
Which you might think is like a little funny scene or a reference to The Little Mermaid, but actually it's a character called Topo, which is a musical octopus from the comics.
Brilliant. Love it. No, I don't know. I didn't know that. So
yeah.
I like stuff like that, and it plays in again to that sort of balls to the wall craziness that they've gone for this film.
And just sort of last little one to end on, the news media in the film is pretty much, it's either a reference or it's taken from the comics, because you've got a TV news channel which is GBS News, which is taken from the comics, and also there's a newspaper called Coast City Ledger, which is obviously a nod to Green Lantern's hometown.
Yeah.
And something that we previously covered.
Would have been nice if Green Lantern was in any of these. Cool. All right. Is that all for today?
Yeah, like I said, there is a whole bunch of Easter eggs in this film, but I'm not going to sit there and go through all of them, because a lot of you would fall asleep, including you.
I probably would. But no, I liked those. They were some good Easter eggs. Thank you for that. Very tasty.
Wet Easter eggs.
Very wet, maybe boiled in a salt water. That helps.
Salty eggs.
Shall we get back to the film and comic and wrap things up?
Yeah, go on then.
Perfect. Right, so, generally speaking, your impressions of the film, the comic, what were they?
Overall, like I said, second time watching the film, enjoyed it a lot more this time than the first time. I think because I didn't have the sort of salty taste from the previous DC films. I think I went into it this time with just going, right, let's watch it as an Aquaman film.
Yeah.
Let's not think of it as a part of the world that they're trying to make. Trying and failing, in my opinion. But film, not my favourite, but it worked. It's a fun time.
Yeah.
A little bit too long, like you said.
Yeah.
They could cut a few bits out. They didn't have to include Black Manta. They could have just had him in a post-credit scene.
Yeah, anything
That's
like that,
it.
really. No, I agree. I think there's one or two too many wheels in motion in this film. I think there's too many side quests that detract from the main plot line. And as a result, the main villain doesn't feel particularly fleshed out. And there were several times in this movie where I sort of suffered this narrative whiplash as we pan from one place to another and something random was happening. 1 second Aquaman's talking to Julie Andrews' Kraken, and the next we have a war between fish and crabs. And I was like, wait, why is this happening now? You know, it feels completely inserted so that they could have a big battle at the end with all the different CGI fish. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's not my least favourite. It probably is actually, I mean, it's going to be in the top half of DCYou films, but I still would only give it a 2 out of 5. So it just shows how poorly they were handling a lot of the other properties.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of touched on it earlier on, but what was your overall thoughts of the CGI?
I thought it was all right. Yeah, no, it's pretty good. I mean, they weren't trying to make it overly realistic. The colours under the water were very bright and bombastic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I thought it was fine. It was a lot of it, but there has to be, really. A lot of these sort of wet for dry or dry for wet scenes they would have been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the overall look and appearance and the lighting and all of that stuff, fantastic. But there were a couple of bits that were a little bit like, is that a PS1 game? Sort of the bits that I can think of was when Volko was training a teenage Arthur.
Yeah.
And they first go in the water and it's like, oh, you could have made that a little bit. I think the CGI fails a little bit with the human look of it.
Yes, the other one I thought of was the hologram message they had from the founder of Atlantis.
Yeah.
That looked real PS1-y. Yeah, I know what you mean. But there's so much, you know, almost every scene in this film has got CGI in it, and if you can only pick up a couple of instances where it feels jarring, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
One thing that actually annoyed me, which I didn't mention earlier, is there's a trope in films that does annoy me, where a conversation is going on, they're having a lovely chat, and then it's interrupted by a surprise attack. You know, someone shooting at the hero or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's not a problem in itself, that's fine. But, you know, the main character always survives. And it's like, well, if you've spent this long setting up an ambush, you might as well have spent 5 seconds longer and aimed and just shot them in the head.
Yep.
But I'm not kidding. We both were watching this last night and we thought every conversation they've had so far has ended with an explosion.
Yeah.
It happened 5 times in the film that they were having a conversation and then something blew up in front of them, or they got shot at, and it was just over and over. So that bugged me a little bit when watching it. I was thinking, this is already an annoying trope, but you've overused it within this one film. Every 20 minutes, a conversation was interrupted by an explosion.
Talking about people surviving, how the hell did Black Manta survive that fall off the cliff? He bounced off about 10 times.
Yeah, I can only assume it was the suit. He was fighting Aquaman before that, so he was getting on all right, wasn't he? But yeah. Anyway, the comic.
Let's get back to the comics then. I would say I preferred the comic more than I thought I would.
Right,
actually.
okay.
Now that I've read a couple of Geoff Johns comics, I can now see his thinking and the way that he talks about the characters, and he makes them more human, I guess.
Yeah.
He grounds it, but doesn't cause it to become like a dark comic. Like, oh, it's grounded, it must be gritty. No, you can be grounded and not be dark.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a comic that I think at some point I will go back to and carry on. This will probably go onto my list for Christmas.
Yeah, I think they do some nice omnibus editions. I know they do of Green Lantern. They do 3 big, thick omnibus editions of that you can get. Which, yeah, good reads in my opinion.
Yeah. What was your thoughts then?
I really enjoyed revisiting it, yeah. I read all of this run, 52 issues I think it was. It had a couple of different writers in that time.
Were they all new?
No, they had worked for DC before. So there was a couple of different writers in that time, and I think I remember the Cullen Bunn run not being particularly great, but other than that, there was some good writers on it. So it's a good run of comic books, and like you say, I'd already read Green Lantern by Geoff Johns. I was a fan of that style as well. So yeah, I find them very enjoyable. And going back and revisiting it, they aren't ever going to be, I think, my favourite reads.
Yeah.
There's not a lot going on under the surface, ironically, for an Aquaman comic, I find. But they do build narratively. Narratively, they build very well. They develop subplots and mythos and lore. And they do it in a cinematic way. So I do enjoy reading them. But I always find reading back how sort of little of a lasting impression they make. But
yeah.
So they feel like really good, fun, entertaining popcorn pieces, popcorn comics. Yeah.
When I watch a film, comic book or not, I go online and I watch people talking about them because I like to see other people's thoughts.
Yeah.
And whenever I've looked up things about this film or as a whole, the character, A lot of people have said you must go and read Geoff Johns' run on the all-new 52, which now that I've gone and seen it, I now see what they mean. If you want to learn more about the character or you want a good, fun comic to read, this one I'd pick up.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's not going to win any awards, I guess. You know, if someone said to me, I'm thinking about picking up either Scott Pilgrim or Aquaman, I'd probably say, if you want a good, quick comic, this one. If you want like an actual good read, more enjoyable, probably Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the dangers of long-form narrative anyway, you know, in terms of comic books, is they just go on forever, and so there's never as satisfying a conclusion as there is with creator-owned stuff. But I know what you mean. I still enjoy it. I still think it's a very solid action piece, but I think they're good comics, generally. They are, but they're never going to be my favourites. But not everything will be, so that's fine.
Yeah, and that's not a comment on the comic being bad. It's just... It's not one that you come away and you go, oh, I liked their take on this, or, you know, it's a thinker. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were going to recommend Aquaman the film and Aquaman the comic book, would you recommend either, and which order would you recommend to do them in?
I would recommend the comic. Like I said, it's a good gateway comic into the DC world and the character. Film, not so much. I mean, if someone was to ask me which of the DCEU films to watch, I may say this or Shazam.
Yeah.
That's very, very fun. This is quite fun, but like I said, it's a little bit long. But then if they said, recommend me a comic book film, I'd probably go for something in the MCU or, you know, X-Men films or something.
See, I think I would say of the DCEU films, Shazam, first Wonder Woman, Birds of Prey, then maybe Aquaman, somewhere around there. So, yeah, I think it's certainly erring on the top end of that, but that's not a high bar by any metric. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this film. But the comic book, if someone is interested in Aquaman and wants a good jumping on point for that character, there has been a more recent one, but I actually think this is a really good jumping on point. It gives you 52 plus a couple of annuals comic books to read going forward, so you've got plenty to jump into, and it will really set up the character going forward. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it if someone was interested in Aquaman.
And to answer your question about the order, there is no order. I mean, you could do one or the other, you could do both. It doesn't matter. Clearly the film's taken inspiration from the comic, but that's it. You know, you don't have to read the comic to understand the film. You don't have to watch the film to understand the comic. It's the same thing, but it's different takes on it.
Yeah, completely agree. So with that out of the way, any other business?
Yeah, I mean, since we are talking about the DC realm, if you will, something that's come up that we've actually not talked about off air, which is unusual for us not to talk about comic book things. Have you seen the new, and I use the word new in inverted commas because this will be out in 2 weeks, but what do you think of this new take or this new look of the Riddler in the new Batman film?
Yeah, so there's the leaked images of him looking a bit like Dr. Doom. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Clearly what they're going for is the Zodiac Killer look. So they are trying to draw on inspiration from real-world serial killers. But the problem is the Zodiac Killer pictures, you know, he looks like an idiot. So he was a serial killer, but it doesn't make him not look like an idiot. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it will be more scary in the film as opposed to the still images.
He's not been found, so he might hear this and he might come and find you.
Well, good luck. I assume he's quite old by now, and he doesn't know where I am. So I'm going to go out on record and say I'm not afraid of the Zodiac Killer.
Well, I'm going to go on record and say I ain't afraid of no ghosts. I'm a little bit on the fence with it, if I'm honest. I mean, like I said, apparently they've drawn inspiration from the Zodiac Killer. It's one of those things you've got to wait till he comes out and see what it looks like on screen. Going from, obviously, this film to the new Batman film, with Aquaman, the outfits are very comic book. Like, they're very bright, very like, yeah, let's just do it. With this new film, they've gone back to it being grounded, it being dark, you know,
It does seem that way, yeah, which works for Batman. It doesn't necessarily work for every character, and I think this is what DC sometimes forget, is they try to reproduce the Dark Knight trilogy on Superman, and then on the entire line. It doesn't work for characters like that. It doesn't work for Aquaman. It works for Batman because he is a man dressed as a bat with mental issues who is going out and fighting other people with mental issues. And
fair enough.
You know, that grounded, pieced together outfit that we've seen in that leaked image of the Riddler, it works because this is clearly not a well man. This is an unhinged person. And so it is that ragtag patched together weird glasses on a sort of metal mask type look is odd. And it can be because that's what kind of characters we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gone from two extremes really with the Riddler. You've got the 60s show and Batman Returns, when you got, the bright green question mark.
Batman Forever.
Thank you. The bright green question mark suit to now this.
Mm-hmm.
I would maybe in the future like to see something in the middle. I think you've not really watched a lot of it, but with Gotham.
Yeah, Gotham, I did see the Riddler they had in Gotham. I got that far.
Because they do, I think at the end of the last season, they kind of go, right, it's the last season, we're going to do a 5-year jump, and the characters are like full on in the cartoon kind of look.
Right.
And it's not over the top, but it's a bowler hat that's green, he's got a green tie, green kind of suit. It's not Jim Carrey, stupid, spiky, weird hair, and like not a latex suit, but you know what I mean? Like a cat suit kind of thing.
Yeah, like spandex or whatever.
It kind of works because it's a suit that's green. It's something that if someone did want to put a suit on with question marks on as green, it works. Whereas, like I said, we've gone from two extremes, daft to dark. I want something in the middle that's a little bit more, not serious, but makes sense, really.
I know what you're saying, but I think this direction of Batman seems interesting. It's a lot more preferable to the Affleck Batman, in my opinion. I can't wait to see what Robert Pattinson does with the character. Yeah, so I'm excited to see it. It seems like an early days of Batman type thing where the world is just finding itself. We haven't quite got to the theatrics of some of the other villains yet. So a character like that, one that we might see in the real world, is interesting. But I will reserve judgment until I've seen the film.
It'd be quite nice to watch it now that I've read Batman Year One, the sort of early version of the character, to now go into the new film with that thought process of going, okay, well, it's not a Batman who's been around for like 20 odd years that shoots people. But yeah, there you go. A new sort of segment, I guess, of our thoughts of new/old news.
2-week-old news, roughly.
Or as I would like to call it, what do DCYou think?
I just told you.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Right. Well, with that out of the way, let's wrap it up there. Thank you once again for your new segment and your Easter eggs, and thank you all for listening. That's all for this episode. If you enjoyed Aquaman The Trench, then you should read the rest of Aquaman Volume 7, which ran for 52 issues, plus a couple of annuals. There were a couple of different writers in that time, but most of it is very solid, especially Dan Abnett's run, which continued into Rebirth and Volume 8. If it's more Geoff Johns that you're after, then why not check out his Green Lantern run as covered in our Green Lantern episode. You can send us a message by popping it in a bottle and throwing it into the sea, or you can email us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred listening platform. Next episode, we'll be putting the Iain in Victorian, as we find ourselves in the esteemed company of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
This episode is H2 over. Iain's.
Want me to ask you anything, or do you want to just go straight in?
Yeah, ask me something.
So, Iain, what Seaster... No, that doesn't work.
Seaster egg.
No. Seaster eggs. That doesn't work. This is dynamite listening.